Welcome to Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 844 for November 8th, 2020, as we celebrate the 15th anniversary of Whiskey Cast this coming Thursday. Coming up in just a few minutes.
As much as I thought I had bourbon figured out, there's so much more to learn. And I had always talked about, there have got to be other ways to innovate, however strict the regulations for bourbon are. I know with my engineering background that subtle changes have significant impacts on flavor creation. So being more active in other spirit categories, going into brandy, going into rum, working more with these other innovative but traditional spirits, I can find ways to be influenced or inspired by their processes and bringing that back to innovate in the bourbon space.
It's been almost a year and a half since Marianne Eaves left Kentucky's Castle and Key Distillery before the first whiskeys she made there after the distillery reopened ever made it into a bottle. Since then, she's become a traveling consultant, a mother, and now an entrepreneur, with her own bespoke blind tasting kits for bourbon lovers. The goal is to use the money from selling those kits to set up her own mobile blending lab. I'll have more with Marianne Eaves later on Whiskey Cast in Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and...
This is historic change for our industry, and it has needed to happen for some time, but it's definitely happening now.
The news is next on this episode of Whiskey Cast.
Hey, whiskey fans, I'm Gabriel Cardarella, brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Distillers. You could probably guess I've got a lot of stories, but for me, the good ones have one thing in common. They're best told over a glass of whiskey. So hit pause, grab your bottle of Dewars, and let's get back to this episode of Whiskey Cast.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast.
Let's get started with the news. Coronavirus cases are rising once again in the Northern Hemisphere as colder weather forces people inside, and we are starting to see more whiskey events being canceled as a result. I mentioned last time around that we might get word this week on the fate of next month's Whiskey Fest events in San Francisco, New York, and Chicago. The announcement came from Whiskey Advocate magazine Friday that all three events have now been canceled for this year. No one from Whiskey Advocate was available for an interview. In an email, their PR spokesperson said the events were canceled, quote, due to the uncertainty of the pandemic and in the interest of practicing safe protocols. 2021 dates will be announced in the coming weeks. In Europe, Stockholm Beer and Whiskey Festival organizers had already postponed this year's event until later this month and condensed it from 2 weekends into one. Now they've decided to postpone it yet again after Swedish officials imposed stricter public health restrictions. Once again, a new date will be announced in the coming weeks. Stricter limits in Germany have also forced Villa Canthor in Limburg and Hansamalt in Hamburg to cancel their in-person tastings that we've had listed for several weeks now on the calendar of events at the Whiskey Cast website. The Kentucky Distillers Association holds its annual meeting on Monday, and this year's event should be much more interesting than usual. That's because the KDA's Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Panel will be presenting its findings on problems within the Kentucky bourbon industry, along with recommendations on how best to solve those problems. The panel was created back in June as part of the association's response to social justice protests following the police shooting of Breonna Taylor in Louisville earlier this year, as well as the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. The KDA has also now funded a total of 9 scholarships for minority students in the Distilling Sciences programs at the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville. But as KDA President Eric Gregory told me, it'll be the work of the Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Panel that helps to create a better climate for those students when they enter the industry.
They've been meeting and they broke into subgroups on everything from marketing to entrepreneurship to tourism, you name it. And wow, talk about an incredible experience, and just looking at the lens of our distilling industry through different eyes was eye-opening for me, I know. I can't wait for the board to hear their recommendations. This is historic change for our industry, and it has needed to happen for some time, but it's definitely happening now.
And, of course, you'll share with us what they say in that recommendation, right?
That's up to our board of directors. We've been very, this is something we've been working on. We really haven't done a lot of press releases or anything about it because we want to make sure that, this is a solid commitment and we get these initiatives in place. So it's not just us giving lip service to this important issue. So that'll be up to the board. But just like the scholarships, if we do something and working with universities that we think can help effectuate real change, we'll definitely announce it.
So on a cheeky note, how come Louisville gets 5 scholarships and UK gets 4?
Well, there's actually a method to that madness. It's all based on the certificate hours. So at the University of Kentucky, their certificate is a 12-hour certificate. So the financial obligation has been to the same amount for the different colleges and universities. So that will fund 4 scholarships at a 12-hour basis at UK, whereas U of L's graduate level online program is a 9-hour certificate. So that funds 5 scholarships for the 9-hour certificate.
There will be at least 3 more scholarships to be funded through the KDA's new Lifting Spirits Foundation. Talks are underway with several other Kentucky colleges to establish those scholarships. Also out of Kentucky, there's word that Brown-Forman may be looking at another distillery expansion soon. This one would be at the flagship Brown-Forman Distillery on the company's Dixie Highway campus in West Louisville, and it could cost as much as $96 million. Kentucky's Economic Development Finance Authority has given tentative approval for a $5 million package of tax incentives that are based on the number of jobs to be created by the expansion. That distillery is the last of Brown-Forman's U.S. whiskey distilleries to get an upgrade. The agency's report indicates there has not been an expansion of production capacity at the distillery for more than 50 years. Brown-Forman issued a statement indicating that no final decision has been made yet on whether to go forward with the project. If it does go forward, it could be completed by 2023. In Scotland, construction work is now going full steam ahead on Gordon and MacPhail's new malt whiskey distillery in Granton-on-Spey near the River Spey. The project had been delayed earlier this year because of COVID-19 restrictions, but we got word this week on the name for the new distillery. It'll be called the Cairn Distillery, as Gordon and MacPhail's Ian Chapman told me.
We've done all the land works at the site at Granton-on-Spey. We've started to pour concrete. So over the coming weeks and months, it will start to really take shape. And we're very, very excited as we move into 2021 to maybe start seeing some spirit flow from the stills. And hopefully in spring of 2022, they start to welcome visitors from all over the world. So, yeah, an incredibly exciting moment for the business.
What went into picking the name? I know that you were trying to pick something that would work across all languages, and that was a key thing that was important, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as somebody who's involved in marketing, what a terrific opportunity to start with a blank sheet of paper, if you like, and really come up with a name for a distillery. So we have a blank sheet of paper when we came to the design of the distillery, and we've got a blank sheet of paper when we come to the name as well. So yes, we wanted it to be distinctly Scottish, very much rooted in the locale, and the locale being the Cairngorm Mountains. But we wanted it to be easy to pronounce, easy to spell, has a sort of international flavour to it as well. So, we had quite a few goes at it. We had a number of different names in the hat, and they all went through a series of filters to really predetermined filters to sort of determine a shortlist. And then the shortlist was put forward to the family, the owners of the business, and they made the final choice. So the Cairn it is.
What were the ones you rejected?
Gosh, there was a few. It would probably take too long to go through them. There was about 300, so we probably don't have too long to go through them all. But certainly the one we've landed on, we're very pleased with. It's taken a bit of time to identify the name and to develop the identity for the Cairn as well. But we believe that we've got a strong platform, and we're really, really excited from a marketing point of view to start telling this wonderful story. And I've been telling the team about the analogy. A cairn, for example, is a series of stones that are placed on top of each other. So what a wonderful opportunity to build this brand and metaphorically add a stone as we go along and tell people about what we're trying to do. So yeah, a really exciting time for the company.
More details and an architect's rendering of the distillery are available in the news section this week at whiskycast.com. New whiskeys announced this week. We hinted at this one last month, but Bruichladdich has now officially announced the release of Black Art 8. It's 26 years old and is the fourth Black Art release for Bruichladdich Adam Hannett. 12,000 bottles will be available worldwide. Pricing will vary by market, but the U.S. price is around $450 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have my tasting notes for it soon at the WhiskyCast website. Diageo's Roe & Co. Irish Whiskey is out with the 2020 edition of its Cask Strength series. It's the second bottling in that series, and this one is a 13-year-old Irish single malt. It's the first single malt under the Roe & Co. label. It's available in Ireland and Northern Ireland with a recommended retail price of €74 or £50 a bottle. Walsh Whiskey not only unveiled a new bottle this week for its Writer's Tears whiskies, complete with corks to replace the original screw caps, but the new 2020 edition of Writer's Tears Cask Strength and a new Oloroso sherry cask finish for the Irishman Founders Reserve. It's the first sherry cask finish for that expression and will be available worldwide in limited amounts for €75 or $99 a bottle. Full disclosure, Writer's Tears is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. That boutique whiskey company from Adam Brands has its latest quarterly batch of bottlings out, but the headline whiskey in the batch is the first ever independent bottling from Cairn Distillery in the Highlands. It's a 3-year-old organic whiskey matured in an ex-bourbon cask and was among the first casks filled at Cairn after it opened in the spring of 2017. 374 bottles will be available. There's no word on pricing. Japan's Nikka whiskey is reviving the Taketsuru pure malt with what is being called a refined recipe, using malt whiskeys from both the Yoichi and Miyagikyo distilleries. The whiskey gets its name from the legendary Masataka Taketsuru, who founded Nikka and is revered as the father of Japanese whiskey. Like the original, it carries no age statement and will have a recommended retail price in the U.S. of around $80 a bottle. While the U.S. presidential election may finally be over now, except for the recounts, the Electoral College, and other stuff, Dave Schmier's Proof and Wood Ventures has released its second quadrennial release of the Presidential Dram single-barrel rye and bourbon whiskeys. The first release came out for the 2017 inauguration. The second batch is a 4-year-old bourbon, the one-termer, while the 2-term Presidential Dram Straight Rye is 8 years old. Both were distilled at MGP, and as Dave said in the news release announcing this year's batch, the most heated debate in America should be bourbon versus rye. And unlike political voting, in this case, you can choose both. They'll be available in the Washington, D.C. area and at select retailers around the U.S. The bourbon, $60 a bottle. The rye, $115. Finally, if you're thinking of sending British Prime Minister Boris Johnson a holiday gift, keep this number in mind. 140 pounds, or about $183. That's the limit UK law sets on the value of acceptable gifts for ministers and members of Parliament to avoid possible corruption. It turns out the Scotch Whisky Association gave the Prime Minister some whiskey during a March 23rd meeting on support for businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. The SWA sent out a news release that day calling on the UK government for tax relief on duty payments during the pandemic, relief that was apparently not granted. We don't know whether the SWA delegation gave him a single bottle or an assortment, but the gift itself set off a red flag in the Cabinet Office, which confiscated the whiskey because the overall value was above 140 pounds. Their Cabinet Office report also shows they confiscated a gift of wine from the Hungarian government, along with artwork, caviar, and baby clothes. We have asked the SWA for clarification on just what that gift was. We'll keep you posted. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. Time now for the Whiskey Cast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. I mentioned the latest event cancellations during the news, so let's focus in on the events that will be taking place in the coming weeks. Since New Zealand has the coronavirus under control, Tosh McGill will be hosting a whiskey tasting at Clipper in Auckland, New Zealand this Tuesday night. The Spirit of Toronto's virtual masterclass series continues this week, with Springbank's Findlay Ross on Friday, Todd Leopold of Leopold Brothers in Denver on Saturday, and Patrick Zuidam of Zuidam Distillers in the Netherlands on Sunday. Bonhams has its next auction of rare whiskeys on November 20th and 21st in Hong Kong, and will have its final whiskey auction of the year on December 9th in Edinburgh, Scotland. I have mentioned Whiskey Live Taipei on previous episodes. The Whiskey Live website shows it's still on the calendar for November 28th, but with a to-be-confirmed caveat. Since the local promoters have not responded to emails asking whether it will go on as planned, we have removed it from the calendar for now. Buffalo Trace Distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky has confirmed that its annual holiday lighting of the Trace will start on December 3rd, with holiday lights each night through New Year's Day. The distillery's annual Visit Santa at the Trace is currently scheduled for the weekend of December 10th through the 13th, but Buffalo Trace is reformatting that event to allow for social distancing, so check their website for the latest details. Of course, that is our standard reminder for any in-person events right now, since things are subject to change on short notice depending on local public health restrictions. We're updating the calendar at whiskycast.com with details as we get them from event organizers, and we already have events listed throughout all of 2021, and we hope we'll all be able to get together again very soon. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits, including their brand new rye whiskey, finished in Catoctin Creek's own Short Hill Mountain Peach Brandy barrels. Peach Barrel Select Rye Whiskey goes on sale next Monday at the distillery in Purcellville, Virginia, and wherever you find Catoctin Creek whiskeys. Visit the Where to Buy page at catoctincreekdistilling.com for details, and please drink responsibly.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Whiskey Cast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock. Marianne Eaves is part of a new generation of whiskey makers, outspoken, bold, and not afraid to challenge long-standing industry traditions. She made headlines several years ago when the founders of Castle and Key Distillery hired her away from Foreman to oversee their restoration of what had been the abandoned Old Taylor Distillery, and they gave her the title of Master Distiller. In May of last year, while the whiskeys that she had been making were still a year or more away from being bottled for the first time, she walked away from Castle and Key, saying she had other goals in mind. Since then, she's become a consultant, working with other spirits as well as whiskey. She also blended the Sweetens Cove Tennessee Bourbon released earlier this year, and became a mother. She now lives in Oregon, where she has set up her home base and wants to build a mobile blending lab. That prompted her to start Eaves Blind. It's a new membership program that offers bourbon lovers a chance to experience blind tastings 4 times a year. And it's where we started our conversation this week. What does blind tasting do to help the average whiskey lover who doesn't know much about tasting whiskeys for evaluation purposes, but wants to learn? What does blind tasting do?
I think when people think about blind tasting, they're mostly thinking like, I have a series of samples and I don't know what they are, or I'm trying to guess what they are, or somebody's trying to trick me into picking something that I don't normally like, or something like that. Whereas this, it's got the layer where you don't know what you're tasting, you don't know where it's from. Everything is bourbon, but you also can't see the liquid. So it's almost like, having your eyes closed while you're tasting. And it's interesting, if you haven't had that experience, it feels very different because you're focusing so much on what you're tasting, what your palate is experiencing. And that's what I really want the folks who choose to join this membership program is to focus on what their palate is experiencing, to actually, pay attention to the flavors that they can perceive and the different nuances of these spirits that I'll be presenting to them along the way.
And where are the whiskeys coming from that you're putting into these? Because I know they're blind, but are they whiskeys that you're working on for other folks? Are they current products that are out on the market? What are these people tasting?
So that's a part of the secret, and I'm going to keep that a secret until the end of the program. So I'm calling it the culmination of Eaves Blind in December of 2021. All of the sources actually will be revealed, so folks will finally get to know all of these samples that they've tried and where they've come from.
But without the specifics, can you give us a hint of, say, like, is this stuff that you've been working on?
This is not a product that I have been working on, like, to make a brand from. I'll say that.
Okay. So these are blends that you might have just put together just for this project.
Yes.
Okay, that's fair. So this is stuff that you put together that are blends of existing casks or existing whiskeys that you put together to challenge the consumer.
Right. So I will say none of this product is product that I distilled, and it is curated specifically for this program. I'm making blends specifically to create different experiences.
What's in this for you other than funding the project that you're working on? And let's talk about that, because it's basically, this is funding this mobile blending lab that you're putting together, right?
Absolutely. That was really the reason why I decided to do it in the first place. I was like thinking about all the ways that, maybe I could raise some money to get the mobile laboratory up and going. And I approached a couple folks about sponsorships, but those didn't work out. So I really love the idea of taking folks along on this journey with me. There was kind of a big aha moment for me after as I was trying to decide what my next step was, beyond Castle and Key, and I had this aha moment, and this is a way actually, bring people along on the next stage of my journey, but also give them a similar experience in that kind of realization in this industry.
Where's the ultimate goal for this project? Is this something that you could do again in the future? You're planning 4 releases over the next year, but could you do a 2022 edition, for instance?
Yeah, I think there will be a 2022 edition, and I really feel like the opportunities for a program like this are kind of endless. Maybe there'll be a rum blind in the future, or a gin blind, or I think there's definitely opportunities for international spirits as well, like Scotch and Japanese whiskey, and who knows where it can all go from there.
You mentioned your departure from Castle and Key, and that took a lot of folks by surprise, and we have not talked since then. I got to ask, why did you choose to leave just as their whiskeys that you had just started to make were just about to hit the market? We have tasted them now with the Pinhook releases for this year that beat Castle and Key's own releases, but why did you leave before we got a chance to taste what you'd made?
It was just that life was pulling me in a little bit of a different direction. It's not something that I can talk about in too much detail with respect to what was happening internally within the company, but I had always felt like there was a greater opportunity out there for me than just being with one brand, and there were many factors that played into the decision to leave when I did, but I'm kind of grateful. I am where I am now, and there's so many exciting things ahead, happening and ahead for this coming year.
Let's talk about some of those now, because one of those is Sweetens Cove, your partnership down in Tennessee with a bunch of athletes and other folks. And how did that all come about?
I was introduced to the team at Sweetens Cove through Tennessee Distilling. They're in Columbia. The folks at Sweetens Cove had already purchased 100 of those 13-year-old Tennessee-produced bourbon barrels that happened to be aged in Kentucky. They brought them back down to Tennessee, and they were just being housed there at Tennessee Distilling. Well, they were thinking about, we can definitely just dump all these barrels together and make a brand, but what we'd prefer to do is kind of be thoughtful about the flavor and find somebody that can help us with that aspect of it, to put some work into them and make the most unique flavor combinations that are possible. So the folks there at Tennessee Distilling connected them with me, and I don't know if they really knew my background or who I was. They were just like, yeah, Tennessee Distilling said that you do blending and that you're from Tennessee. And it kind of fit the brand story. So it was interesting. I think they were a little surprised when the product released, how much my reputation kind of helped, with the bourbon nerds, to think of it in different terms more than just, another celebrity brand.
And we use the term bourbon nerds with all affection and love, right?
Absolutely. I am a nerd. I lovingly refer to people that way, and myself.
Same here as well. But the partners in Sweetens Cove are a lot of high profile people with a lot of high profile opinions, and very opinionated. That had to be somewhat of a challenge for you to go in and basically put all these boys in their place and tell them, I've forgotten more about bourbon than you guys know. Trust me on this, right?
Well, it was interesting just coming onto the team. I told them my process, and basically they said, well, here you go. Here are the 100 barrels and make what you make. You're the artist. This is your palette, just make us something beautiful. And they put all of their trust in me. And, when I had the batches finalized, I sent them back to them and they were like, okay, this is what we're bottling. There wasn't really, there was no power struggle. I didn't, encounter any egos like them telling me that they knew bourbon better than I did. Everybody on that team, I feel is very humble, and it's just a really, really great group, in my opinion.
And I'm tasting batch 3 here, so tell me about batch 2 and batch 3. I mean, you've been working on more batches of this, right?
Well, this is all part of that first release. So that first 100 barrels, I created 5 batches from. So you got a sample of the third batch, which I believe was an 18-barrel batch. So they're all, really small samples, but they all have their unique characteristics. So it was really fun, and I think maybe even a little bit more of a challenge for them to say, the world is your oyster, make whatever you want to make. Having a sample of barrels and trying to create 5 consistent flavored batches versus 5, totally different batches. It's actually easier to create the consistent flavor.
So what else have you been working on besides having a little girl?
Yeah, I'm a mama now.
You distilled a baby. Let's put it that way.
Definitely cooked up a baby. My first project actually that I started working on was a brandy project. After I made the transition into the consulting world, Hoops Vineyard out in Oakville, California. Lindsay Hoops, the proprietor, connected with me in Kentucky. We had an event together, a winemaker, female chef, and spirits dinner, and she was telling me about the smoke and how it had affected her crop from 2017. She lost or hasn't been able to sell thus far her entire 2017 Cabernet crop. So we were just talking about it, and she said, I think that there's an opportunity maybe to try and distill it. I love Scotch. I love grapes. Maybe there's something there. And then, with the fires again this year, maybe even worse than those in 2017, it seems like this is just the unfortunate reality now that winemakers in these world-renowned regions are going to have to start thinking about other opportunities, other ways to use the smoke-infused grapes. I don't like the word smoke-tainted because I really feel like, and I've done some distillation with the product, that it's great for a spirit. It's a really nice base for a spirit. You got to think about brandy in a little bit of a different way, because I think, most brandy producers are using pretty neutral grapes and they want it to, be on the skin the least amount of time as possible. They harvest early so that it's a high acid, a lower sugar grape. So there's all these traditions in the industry. So we're kind of breaking the mold with the traditional ways of making brandy, but I think going to come out with a product that's really different and really delicious. So
When's
brandy
it coming out?
Well, still working on what the maturation should be for that. So it is a different type of product. It's got so much flavor in the new distillate. Perhaps it may not need to age as long as some traditional brandies would. And I'm trying different types of barrels too. So I'm still working on the maturation style, but we are also working on vermouth, which could hit the market much sooner, maybe even early this coming year.
I think I hear somebody in the background there.
You hear Andy in the background? Yeah, she's a talkative girl.
Sounds like she's having fun.
Yep, she's hanging out with Daddy.
So what have you learned over the last year or so since you left Castle and Key? What have you learned about yourself?
I think could you please take her outside or to the bed? Thank you.
It's fine.
I think one of the things that I've definitely learned about myself having left Castle and Key and kind of going on the open road is that as much as I thought I had bourbon figured out, there's so much more to learn. And I had always talked about, there have got to be other ways to innovate, however strict the regulations for bourbon are. I know with my engineering background that subtle changes have significant impacts on flavor creation. So being more active in other spirit categories, going into brandy, going into rum, working more with these other innovative but traditional spirits, I can find ways to be influenced or inspired by their processes and bringing that back to innovate in the bourbon space. So that's what I was most excited about doing. And then I come to find out that there's incredible producers across the U.S. who are doing innovative things and just, being open to learning from them, not having this kind of high horse or better, holier than thou feeling just because, I learned how to make bourbon in Kentucky.
Humility for a master blender. What a concept. I'm kidding. I am kidding. But it sounds like you're having a lot of fun with this.
Absolutely.
Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? Do you see yourself back at a distillery on a day-to-day basis or what?
It's hard to imagine being, as much fun as I'm having and creating the network that I am and having the freedom to explore and work those creative muscles a little bit more. It's hard to imagine being in one distillery, day in and day out for the foreseeable, future. I do think that I'll be creating a brand, and I do believe that I will have some spirits of my own. Just what exactly that looks like. I think it's going to push the way that the industry has operated up to this point.
By the way, there's one thing you might notice on a Sweetens Cove label. It's labeled as a Tennessee straight bourbon instead of a, quote, Tennessee whiskey. Marianne Eaves mentioned during our conversation that those 100 barrels spent part of their maturation in Kentucky before being returned to Tennessee. For that reason, the whiskey cannot be labeled as a Tennessee whiskey under state law. That's Whiskey Cast in Depth, brought to you by Mortlock, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlock lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the Sweetens Cove batch number 3 that Marianne and I discussed a few minutes ago. It's a 13-year-old whiskey bottled at 50.25% ABV. The nose has subtle hints of peppercorns, caramel, leather, vanilla extract, and dried leaves. The taste is chewy and thick, with touches of black pepper and allspice, balanced out nicely by caramel, vanilla, and honey, with an aromatic hint of garden herbs in the background. The finish is long and sweet with a nice touch of oak. I'm scoring Sweetens Cove batch number 3 Tennessee Straight Bourbon a 93. A few weeks ago, I reported on the latest whiskey from Diageo's Cascade Hollow Distilling Company in Tennessee, best known as the home of George Dickel. Cascade Moon, edition number 1, is not described as a Tennessee whiskey on the label, just as a whiskey. It's bottled at 42% ABV. The nose has notes of peach cobbler, butterscotch, dried flowers, and a hint of cedar shavings. The taste starts off fruity and sweet at first, with notes of peaches and apricots, followed by a spicy kick of white pepper and allspice, with touches of butterscotch candies and honey in the background. The finish is long and fruity. I'm scoring Cascade Moon, edition number 1, a 91. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Rye Day the 13th is coming up, and while this Friday the 13th may be thought of as unlucky, Friday the 13th will be a very lucky day for one whiskey lover. Sagamore Spirit is offering you the chance to win your own barrel of whiskey. Sort of. Find out more at sagamorespirit.com/Friday the 13th. Now let's look at some American single malts, starting with the second edition of Courage and Conviction from the Virginia Distillery Company. Batch number 2 is named in honor of the late Jim Swan, who was the distillery's consultant in its early years. It's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is sweet and creamy with touches of butterscotch, caramel, and honey. The taste, fruity and vibrant with red apples, raspberries, cocoa powder, and touches of allspice and black pepper. The finish has all of those flavors fading away gently and consistently in a nice balance. I'm scoring Courage and Conviction, batch number 2 from the Virginia Distillery Company, a 90. If you missed our happy hour webcast this past Friday night, we dug deep into barley with Westland Distillery's master distiller Matt Hoffman and Steve Jones, a grain breeder and geneticist who runs the Bread Lab at Washington State University and has strains of barley in his seed bank that go back 500 years. The replay is available on demand at our YouTube channel. Calere will be the second release in Westland's Outpost range when it comes out next spring, but it's already been bottled and is just waiting to be shipped out now. It's distilled from Alba barley grown by Skagit Valley farmers who work with the Bread Lab in northwest Washington. Calere is matured in a combination of first and second fill ex-bourbon barrels and bottled at 50% ABV. The nose is malty and sweet with honey and toasted caramel, along with a good hint of straw and subtle spices. The taste is spicy with cardamom and cinnamon notes, complemented by a good maltiness and touches of toasted caramel and honey. The finish is long with hints of spices and a lingering barley sugar maltiness. I'm scoring the Westland Calere a 92. Westland's annual fall release of Garyana single malt has been incorporated into the Outpost range and uses Oregon Gary oak casks for part of the maturation. The exact percentage varies from year to year. Garyana is also bottled at 50% ABV. The nose has touches of oak tannins, pine needles, sawdust, dried grass, and soft spices. The taste is tannic and spicy with black pepper and clove, while hints of pine needles and maple syrup linger in the background. The finish is long and woody. I'm scoring the 2020 release of Westland's Garyana single malt a 93. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,000 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Gabriel Cardarella again, the Doers Guy. I've seen a lot in my years as brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended scotch. Like the time I got to hold an actual letter written by Andrew Carnegie. A letter from 1891. In it, asking Doers to ship a keg of whiskey to President Benjamin Harrison at the White House. Spoiler alert, we did. And the bourbon folks were not too happy about it. Pretty cool, right? Well, here's another story for you. In 2019, our master blender, Stephanie Mcleod, became the first woman to be awarded Master Blender of the Year by the International Whiskey Competition. And a year after that, she won it again. Stephanie's first creation for Doers 15 year, is another piece of history. Sweet, floral, with notes of honey and toffee, a perfectly balanced addition to the Doers lineup. It's a great introduction to Scotch for beginners, and it's more than complex enough to satisfy whiskey aficionados. So grab some Doers 15, call some friends, and make a few stories of your own. That's what a good bottle of whiskey is all about.
This is a very special week for us, and hopefully for many of you as well. Back on November 12th, 2005, we dropped the very first episode of Whiskey Cast, and this Thursday, we will be celebrating the 15th anniversary of Whiskey's longest-running podcast series. It's fair to say that this year has not been what we all hoped it would be. We had been hoping to have an anniversary party that would have brought many of you together. But, of course, the pandemic made that impossible. It has been a year of highs and lows. We mourn the friends we lost to COVID-19 and raise a glass in their memories. 2020 and this 15th year of Whiskey Cast will be a year that we will never forget. I'd like to thank all of you who have joined me on this journey over the years, along with our sponsors, both past and present, and, of course, my family. Together, they make it possible for me to have the best job in the world. Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. With a change coming in the White House on January 20th, Ryan Sheridan asked this question on Facebook this weekend. What's the chances of tariffs being reduced on whiskey under Biden? That's a really good question, Ryan, and it is also really too early to say. The Biden campaign did not specifically address the whiskey tariffs in its platform, but the dispute with the European Union that led to EU tariffs on American whiskeys a couple of years ago started when the Trump administration decided to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Europe. The Biden platform does stress using American-made steel and other products as much as possible, but it also said a Biden administration would work with its allies to solve the oversupply of steel. We also know that Biden views international cooperation as more valuable than the Trump administration has. On the other hand, there's the dispute over subsidies for Airbus and Boeing that led to the U.S. tariffs on single malts from Scotland and Northern Ireland and liqueurs from around Europe a year ago. That conflict actually goes all the way back to the George W. Bush administration and was being argued throughout Biden's 8 years as vice president with no resolution. In short, there is no way to tell right now, but we will keep following it. Last time around, we reported on Kentucky's distillers setting a new record for maturing barrels on hand in the Commonwealth's rickhouses. I posted a graphic on social media this week showing the change in that number between 1967 and 2019, and it's almost a U-shaped line. Marshall Smith and John Miller both wondered this on Facebook. Would be interesting to see what percentage of the barrels are 4 years old or younger. That's a great question, too, but once again, we do not have a clear answer. The Kentucky Department of Revenue requires licensees to disclose the total number of barrels that they have in inventory on January 1st each year for tax purposes, but it does not require them to disclose the ages of those barrels. However, if you look at how sharply that line has risen in the last several years, it seems pretty logical that a lot of the growth is based on barrels that are under 4 years old. We just don't have a way to quantify it. Last week, we named the Nakata Bangkok Whiskey Club in Thailand as November's Whiskey Club of the Month. We heard from Club President Andy Perez this week. Thank you very much for the shout-out of our Bangkok Whiskey Club on the latest Whiskey Cast. We are honored, humbled, and grateful. We will be sure to spread the Whiskey Cast podcast love as much as possible. I forgot to mention the nationalities in our club, and we are expanding: South Africa, Switzerland, Italy, USA, Brazil, France, Denmark, Ireland, Pakistan, and Australia so far. Thanks, Andy. Maybe you guys can all get together and work out the trade and tariff issues for us while you're having club meetings, okay? We'll be sending out your Whiskey Cast Glencairn glasses soon. And if you're a member of a whiskey club, there is still time to nominate your club for December. Just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. If you have a question, a suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskeyCast. The email address is comments at whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all those other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. It's often said that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, except, of course, when imitation becomes counterfeiting. While many of Scotland's rare single malts have been targeted by forgers over the years, Pappy Van Winkle is arguably one of the preferred choices among American whiskies. Wright Thompson's new book, Pappyland, is out in print this week. Last week, he joined me on our Happy Hour webcast and shared what happens when Julian Van Winkle gets hold of a fake Pappy.
All of the confiscated counterfeits get sent to Buffalo Trace. And so Julian tries them. It's pretty funny because he was telling me one time, most of the time it's crap in those bottles. But someone, they think, either stole or made the actual capping machine. And so you can't tell the difference. There is no difference. It's the exact same machine they'd be using in the factory to put new caps and the seals and all that on there. And so these fakes are incredible. And what Julian was telling me, he was like, yeah, I just had this one, and it wasn't Pappy, but it was, whatever it was really good. But, he was laughing. But that makes him crazy.
Wright Thompson is the author of Pappyland, and you can read my review at whiskycast.com. He and Julian Van Winkle will be appearing on a live Zoom charity event next Monday night through squarebooks.com to benefit the Lee Initiative, and ticket prices include a raffle ticket for a bottle of Pappy. A real bottle of Pappy. We have a link for ticket information in the show notes for this episode at the WhiskyCast website. And if there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, along with my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, cocktail recipes, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes, all the way back to episode number 1, 15 years ago this week. We'd love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
At Doers, we love a good story, and that's why we're always writing new chapters. Like our Illegal Smooth finished in mezcal casks. With notes of sliced green pepper and a wisp of smoke, a world's first, Illegal brings cultures together for something truly unique. As a 174-year-old brand, we could rest on our laurels. Instead, we'd much rather continue writing. Because when you keep telling the same old story, that's when people stop listening.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening for the last 15 years and counting.